Welcome to richplanet.net, the programme which aims to uncover the truth behind the alien and UFO mystery. I'm Richard D. Hall, and in this series of programmes I will be featuring 3 programmes on the research of veteran UFO investigator David Cayton. Okay, we've come down to Manchester to visit David Cayton again, because he has a mind full of information that I want to get onto tape.
If I've got a mind.
And I want to talk about David's UFO research, because David's UFO investigation goes back 16 years when he started working for Quest International, and he was an investigator for 3 years during that time. And prior to that, David's career started in the Royal Air Force as a photographer. Yeah. And I'm quite interested in that because there was one case that you were informed of whilst you were in the RAF, which involved a UFO. But can you just start by telling us, David, what does an RAF photographer do? I mean, why does the RAF need photographers? What's the whole purpose of that? And what was your role in the RAF?
Yeah. Well, of course, things have changed since 1955 when I was originally called up. And I signed on, because I wanted to do photography. Otherwise, I was going to spend 2 years as a national serviceman doing something very boring, like a clerking job or something. I didn't fancy that. Yeah. So they dangled the old carrot and said, "Oh, photography, you need to sign up as a regular." You said. So I did that eventually after the square bashing first, and I'm glad I did, because it led to a very interesting career there, and also in the end to an interesting job at British Aerospace by sheer chance. So you say, what do they do? Well, there's a variety of roles, and in the old days when I joined, the photography branch was split into 3. For BP bulk processing, which what I was actually doing, for processing the air film, making the prints, the enlargements and the mosaics, and then there was photo RS, which
this is photographs of the land taken from above.
Yes.
Yeah. On like reconnaissance missions.
Yeah, and I spent 2.5 years in Germany on 80 PR squadron on Canberra PR7s, where we were taking the aerial photographs, and those were low-level oblique stuckers, or low-level stuff in Germany into the eastern border.
East Germany and beyond?
Yes, well, occasionally they would strip the cameras out and they'd do a low-level flip, to the Russian-controlled border to probe the Russian radar. And the Russians did the same to us. Right. And the pilots used to come back and strapping to get out. They'd say, "Oh, we've passed Ivan," we waved to Ivan, "I'm going the other way," So there was all that stuff going on. And then there was normal photography, where you would be taking VIP visits, parades, ceremonial things, crash investigations, bits of, defective components, like industrial photography really, taking the identity photographs of everybody, everyone has to have a form 1250, the ID card. And so a lot of things.
Yeah.
So.
And did you spend any time on aircraft actually taking photographs then?
No, the cameras are automatic, they're electrically run, and the pilot or the navigator flicks the switches. So we've sort of installed the cameras and the magazines, with the loading of the magazines, and unload them when they come back off the sortie.
I see.
And then they go in for processing.
Right.
So
Okay. Now, in 1958, tell me about this UFO that was seen over the Mediterranean, because I understand it was picked up on 3 separate radio stations. Radar stations.
Yes.
Well, so give me the background of that.
Yes, it's okay. So yes, I was posted to Cyprus in 1957. So I was there up till 1960 at an establishment it's a base called Episcopi, which was sort of west of Limassol towards Paphos, but only a few miles from Limassol. And the outfit was called JARIC Middle East, which is the Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Centre. So at the time we were dealing with the Ayoka terrorist problem, try and track where the terrorists were in Cyprus to help the army on the ground. And there was still trouble then in the Middle East, in Beirut and what have you. I enlarged so many pictures of Beirut airport at the time, I think I could have walked around the place. So.
And this, of course, was in the day before satellites and Google Maps and all of that.
Yes, so I mean, the role of photographers now in the Air Force, I guess, is shrunk, because they're using so many electronic digital means So they're not handling film, I don't think, anymore, and all the wet processing's probably all gone. Yes, it was very much a hand job, you know, making the enlargements and the mosaics, and to help the photo interpreters who were based at Jarrick, who would actually interpret the photographs and then pass the intelligence information to whoever needed it, the Navy, the Army, and whatever. So, and on Troodos, the Troodos Mountains in Cyprus is where the sort of white bit of cloud is up here. We have a radar site there, which we still have actually, and this radar site was tracking this object which had come up from Egypt across the Med. It was also tracked from a radar site in Malta and one on the North African coast. I think it was Libya, pre-Gaddafi days. We had a site somewhere there anyway. And a friend of mine, a colleague, photographer, Barry Porter, was up on the radar sites, and photographers had to take the turn, I think about 4-week stints or something like that, to photograph radar screens as and when required.
So was this a regular thing? That what would they photograph a radar screen when something interesting appeared on it? Then is that what they would do, or they didn't have any means of pressing a button and saving? Like they do, like you would do now, you would save it to hard disk or something.
No, they didn't have
so you take a photograph of the radar.
Yes,
screen,
you had a big 5x4 MPP plate camera on a tripod set up on the screen. Now, partly why they were doing that was because they had some experimental, what they call then, it was a secret, over-the-horizon radar, looking over Turkey east towards Russia, getting Cold War days still. And that's why the photographers were there, or a photographer, in this case Barry. I went up once to take film, fresh film, and bring back exposed material. Anyway, Barry was on duty middle of that, it was about 5 o'clock in the morning, nothing much happening, boring as heck. And then he realised there was some commotion going on in the radar room, so he thought, gathered his camera gear up and his tripod and thought, expecting to be called in to photograph something, and witnessed them tracking this object, doing something like 12,500 miles an hour, the west side of the Med, off the west side of Cyprus here, off the Paphos coast, and then it eventually tracked up 40 miles of ocean to across to Turkey. But before it did that, as it came across the sea, it did a 90-degree sharp turn with no loss of speed. But it must have pulled, I don't know, 150 G plus, I would think.
And what height was it at this time?
38,000 feet, as I remember. Now, Barry told me that some years later, actually, he was told, along with everybody else, after this event, to keep quiet. In fact, a wing commander appeared from RAF headquarters in Nicosia and lined all the team up, might be 6 or 7 guys, and said, you remember, you've signed the Official Secrets Act, you mustn't talk to this about anybody. And Barry didn't for many years, but then realising, you know, in civilian life, what I was doing, he told me this story. Anyway, going back to the story, it didn't change speed. It was no gradual turn, just an acute 90-degree turn, heading back towards the west coast of Cyprus. It was decided then that they scrambled 2 RAF Hunter fighters from Nicosia to intercept. And I guess when the fighters were climbing out, it's like the object seemed to know, as has been reported before, that military aircraft are approaching, and he just jumped to 60,000 feet, just like that, you know, quick as that. Which was above the ceiling of the Hunters, so they couldn't get near, so they went back to base. And
there's no man-made technology that could do that even now.
No. I mean, I think the Americans they launched a scramjet from beneath a B-52 a few years ago, and I think they made about 5,000 miles an hour with this thing, but only for a short burst. I mean, it wasn't a prolonged flight. So, you know, we're 50 odd years plus, and we still haven't got anything like that speed. Well, it went up to 18,000 miles an hour. I forgot to mention that. So it's changed from 12,000 or so to 18.
And just to clarify the point, this was actually monitored at three
Yes.
independent radar
That's correct.
stations.
Yeah. Yes.
And where were they positioned?
Well, one on Mount Olympus, which is the highest point of Troodos Range in Cyprus.
Mm-hmm.
The other one was at Malta,
Mm-hmm.
and I said the North African coast. So the controllers, the radar operators, were coordinating this and talking to each other, to tracking it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it shot across north of Cyprus, over the 40 miles of ocean, onto the Turkish mainland, and heading eastwards,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually off the radar.
Okay.
So that really
Sparked your interest.
it certainly did. I mean, I was sort of mildly interested, and I'd read certain things, but it was one of the catalysts, if you like,
Mm-hmm.
when Barry told me this story, that I decided I should be looking at this seriously.
And just another question on the actual radar, David. Is it possible to determine the size of an object on a radar? Or
Not very well, I believe. I'm not a radar specialist, but they can tell. They get some idea by the sort of reflection, but they can't size very well.
Right.
Speed and altitude and position they can.
Yes.
Sizing can be a problem. So,
Okay.
as it is now, even depending on the shape of an aircraft, some aren't very good reflectors, and they're designed to be not good reflectors.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And this story, has this come out in the MOD secret files that they're releasing?
I very much doubt it,
Mm-hmm.
because about the same time there was a group captain
Mm-hmm.
who came out. He's 80 odd now.
Gordon Burgess.
Gordon Burgess, yes, and the fact that he, has some rank and a CBE to boot as well.
Right.
At the same time, he was flying Shackletons around the coast of Cyprus in 1958. At the same time, looking for boats coming in from Greece carrying arms for the Ioka terrorist organisation. That was the job.
Okay.
And he was flying back from Akateri back to base in Malta, when it was at 38 Squadron, I think. He was only a squadron leader at the time, and he had 16 pairs of eyes aboard his Shackleton, and they were actually near Crete.
And this was on the same night?
No,
That was
same year.
Same year.
It could have been the same month, but I'm not dead sure about that. It
Right.
was certainly 1958.
Right.
And so he had 16 people looking at this. It was at night time, so it was an illuminated object making fantastic manoeuvres and pacing the Shackleton and then shooting away and all the rest of it. And he came up with that story, and that has gone in a magazine, in UFO Data magazine, a while back.
UFOs are often witnessed at locations involving Earth-based technology. This next case illustrates this point.
When you retired from British Aerospace in 1993.
Yeah, January 93. Yeah.
You became an investigator for was it Quest International?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that, David? How did you get signed up and?
Well, I'd heard of Quest and the things we're doing, and the guy who was in charge of the investigations and research was ex-police officer Tony Dodd, and I'd heard his story, his own sighting up in Yorkshire, and how he'd sort of put his police career on the line by declaring his sighting with other police officers, and that impressed me. Someone to do that, and another person who influenced me was Timothy Good, because of a couple of, I think I'd read at least one of his books at the time.
Yeah.
And Timothy, as you probably know, concentrates on a lot of military activity with the UFO business. So that sort of fired me up because of that connection. And the third person was Roy Dutton, who I worked with, not in the same department in British Aerospace. So those three people on that particular Cyprus event decided this was something worth looking at. There was some substance in the whole business.
Yes.
So I signed up with Tony in September '93, and I got my little ID badge.
And you've still got it?
I don't know who this is. Good looking man is on the end here. But it's a bit grey now, but yes.
Okay.
So
your first case then, David, they sent you to a power station, am I right?
Oh yes.
So tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, that was a cracker. I couldn't believe my luck because Tony Dodd had a phone call from two, he said, very frightened engineers who were in a phone box, and saying that 5 of them had witnessed in the early hours that apparently they got cameras on the installation, at the power station, and they wouldn't say to Tony the location of the power station.
Okay.
They just said it was between Haslingden and Worley in Lancashire. And they said this object, this disc, was... They were in the crew room. What they were doing in the rest room, they were got TV monitors there, and they played the tapes back apparently as a routine, and nothing on. They just re-record over them. And one glanced up and was amazed to find or see that this disc was hovering very low over the power lines of the installation on the power station,
Right.
apparently sucking electricity up into the craft.
Okay. That was what they assumed it was doing, just by the virtue of the fact that it was near the power lines.
Yeah, whether they could actually see,
Right.
The electricity, a
Like-
bit like lightning in reverse going up to the craft. I'm not sure.
Right.
That one of the five shot home. This was about perhaps 7 o'clock in the morning, to pick up his domestic VHS tape recorder to make a copy of the tape of the craft. But before they could do that, one of the five either got windy, or lost his nerve, or the management were coming in now about 8 o'clock in the morning, and he notified a senior member of the management that what had happened. So they immediately, apparently, I would assume, confiscated the original tape, which we never recovered, which is very sad. And I'm sure these 5 guys were threatened, very strongly.
You then guessed which power station it was, and then...
Yeah, I looked at the OS maps and looked at the power lines. Oh, and a chap I knew in a photographic club, he worked for the National Grid in a fairly senior position. So I said, I'm looking for a power station or something in this Burnley area. And so he said, oh, it will be Paddy and B. And so I was dispatched there with my new badge,
Yes.
ID badge. Went to the gates, and I showed that badge and told them quite openly. I said to Tony, what's the best way, do you think? Should we be up front and say why I'm there and what we're doing, being a rookie in the UFO investigation business?
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, that's probably the best approach,
Yeah.
And expecting to get shown the door and a load of flack from the 2 guys who were in the security lodge at the gate. I should add that these chaps said to Tony they were CEGB, Central Electricity Generating Board. Now, they were just privatising the power industry, and it had become national power because the transition was taking place. In fact, the power station was running down to be closed, so there was like a skeleton staff still there.
Right.
So I said, I've come to about this, and there was a security man there who worked for an organisation called TIPEC. And he said to me, oh, the UFOs, oh, that'll be Alan you want to speak to. And I thought, gosh, this matter of fact, this is a fact, this has happened.
Right.
And this Alan turned out to be Alan Parfitt, who was a station manager. So they signed me in, and he escorted me down the road. Oh, and I said to him, could I bring the camera in to take some pictures, detailed pictures, where the craft was actually hovering, sucking the electricity. And he said, oh, I don't think that will be a problem.
Right.
So I thought, I'll crack this, this is my first case. Regrettably, I didn't take my camera in with me at the time. It was still in the car.
Right.
Anyway, we walked down to the main reception building and waited for Alan to come back into his office. So he appeared with his white hard hat on, and we went in and sat down, and I told him what I was here to talk to him about, and the whole atmosphere changed immediately, and he denied there was any such thing had happened. He said that we don't record on tape the security cameras routinely anyway, and nobody is sitting viewing them, sort of thing, because, well, people can't do that for a long time. And I realised this Alan Parfitt guy went very quiet, and I think obviously he probably realised he'd spoken out of turn and he was in probably trouble, which he certainly was.
Right.
So all this Alan Parfitt wanted to do was get rid of me as soon as possible, and he pointed me to another partly underground power installation the other side of Burnley, intimating it might have been there to get me off the scent and send me on my way. And a few days, no, about 2 weeks later, I rang them again, different guy in the security box. I didn't let on that I'd been there before, and said about, you know, this thing on a security camera tape, and the chap immediately said, "Oh, well, yes, but we keep reusing the tapes," which really proved what he said, that Alan Parfitt was lying when he said they didn't have video recorders attached to the cameras, which were a bit pointless because in the early 90s the IRA were quite active, and power stations would be a prime target, I guess, not to have camera systems running. And I mean, I actually saw the monitors in the security lodge. So I asked to speak to this Raymond Langford, who was the Tipex guy who I'd first spoken to, and took me down to see Alan Parfitt, and they said, "Oh, he's not here anymore."
Right.
He'd left, and they couldn't supply me with an address or phone number, a private one, so they gave me the phone number of Tipex, the organisation, because they all work for Tipex. And I subsequently rang them, and they weren't very helpful, and they couldn't give me any details, where he worked now, or any personal details. I suppose data protection was beginning to come in then. So I couldn't never get to speak to Raymond. But he was quite amenable to me, because he told me as we were walking down to Alan Parfitt's office that he knew of Graham Birdsall and Tony Dodd and UFO magazine, and he took it from time to time. But he was into ghosts and that sort of paranormal stuff. So he was lucky, really. He was there that day. I called at the power station because he was quite amenable and had interest in that sort of thing.
So do you have any inkling as to who actually puts the dampers on people talking to the likes of you? Do you know what I mean? Because you presume that guy must have been told by his superior, "No, don't speak to Quest International, we don't want any publicity." Do you think it's just that National Power, they don't want any publicity about a UFO above the power line, or where do you think it comes from?
Well, it was certainly senior management, I guess, in National Power in that case, and the 5 engineers who witnessed this, the 2 speaking to Tony Dodd, Tony was aware they were shaken up and a bit frightened. You know, he'd interviewed as a police officer for many years people involved in crime and crime victims. So in his opinion, that they weren't winding him up, it was a genuine case. And they made some reference to their jobs being at risk and their pensions if they leaked this. And, Raymond Langford, the subcontractor security guy, I'm sure, was given the boot, moved on, because it was easier to get rid of a subcontractor who would let the cat out of the bag, or being open to me, you see what I mean. And I think they're probably embarrassed. They may be secret, and maybe because it's a government, in a sense, industry, isn't it?
Yes.
Or it had been, although I think it was becoming privatised. There must be some directive, I would think, from the authorities, the MOD, whoever it might be, plus the fact their own embarrassment that we're all paying for our electricity, and these things are taking the power which we've burnt the coal or the gas, whatever it might be, to produce electricity in the first place. So I wouldn't think commercially it wouldn't be very good for the customers to know this is going on. So,
and just the whole sort of ridicule that could come upon the company, I guess, as well. You know, that they're worried about that it's going to be bad publicity, that people are going to think that they're not sane and all of that sort of stuff.
David Cayton will be back in 2 weeks' time to talk more about his UFO investigations.